What if the food you trusted most, the kind you fed your kids, came laced with something invisible? Something that doesn't smell, doesn't taste, but silently attacks. Something that shuts down kidneys, lands toddlers in the ICU, and kills. In 2022, that nightmare became real. And it didn't come from some off-brand knockoff sold in the corner of a shady supermarket. It came from Buitoni, one of the most recognizable names in frozen food. Owned by Nestlé, the largest food company in the world. This is the story of how a frozen pizza brand, trusted for decades, became the face of one of the worst food poisoning disasters in modern history. It all started quietly, and then it didn't. In early 2022, doctors across France began noticing a disturbing pattern. Young children, some as young as 3, arriving at hospitals with violent symptoms. Vomiting, bloody diarrhea, dehydration so severe that IVs weren't enough. Then, something even worse, kidney failure. Doctors rushed to identify the cause. The children hadn't all gone to the same school or eaten at the same restaurant, but lab results pointed to a dangerous strain of E. coli, specifically O26 and O103. These weren't the strains that caused minor stomach bugs. These were the ones that trigger hemolytic uremic syndrome, a condition so severe it can permanently destroy the kidneys. It's often fatal in children. By the time public health officials connected the dots, dozens of kids had already been hospitalized. Specialists worked around the clock. There had to be a common source, and then quietly the pattern emerged. Parents mentioned frozen pizza, but not just any pizza. Buitoni's Fraîche Up line, a staple in French households, the kind of food you'd give your child without a second thought. Photos of the boxes in family freezers matched. Batch numbers aligned. Reports overlapped. The conclusion became inescapable. The pizza was contaminated, and by then, it was too late. Nestlé issued a recall, but it was reactive, not preventative. 2 children were already dead. Over 50 others were injured, some permanently. Kidney failure, long-term neurological complications, psychological trauma, and the families? Shattered. Public outrage exploded when inspectors entered the Buitoni facility in Caudry, northern France, the origin of the pizzas. What they found wasn't negligence, it was squalor. Mold clinging to ceilings near food prep stations, rusted machinery caked with old residue, insects, flies, rotting scraps left on conveyor belts, and rats. Active rodent infestations in a factory producing food for millions of homes. And this wasn't a one-time lapse, it was systemic. Equipment hadn't been cleaned properly, hygiene protocols were ignored. Employees later testified they were pressured to keep the lines moving even when conditions were visibly unsafe. In one report, inspectors noted that cleaning checklists had been falsified. In another, they found bacterial contamination on surfaces meant to be sterile. This wasn't just a health violation, it was a ticking time bomb. On April 1st, 2022, the French government shut down the Caudry plant, permanently. But the factory was only part of the story. The other part was what happened in living rooms, kitchens, and hospitals across the country. One mother said her daughter collapsed the morning after eating the pizza. By the time they reached the hospital, her kidneys had already started failing. Another child was in dialysis for 31 days. Some families had to teach their children how to walk again after weeks in intensive care. Some children will live the rest of their lives with one kidney. Others with emotional trauma far harder to treat. And 2 families will never get their children back. The French government launched a criminal investigation into Nestlé and Buitoni. The charges? Involuntary manslaughter, bodily harm, endangering lives, deceptive commercial practices. Lawsuits began pouring in, but most parents weren't after money. They wanted accountability. They wanted answers. How could the world's largest food company allow this to happen? Nestlé apologized, issued statements, but it felt too late. Their factories were supposed to meet global standards. They were supposed to be safe. But the truth is, this story was never just about Buitoni. It was about what's hidden behind every glossy food label and familiar logo. It was about what happens when efficiency is prioritized over ethics, when brands chase margins and investors, instead of safety and sanitation. And if this could happen in a Nestlé factory, a company worth hundreds of billions, what about smaller factories, less regulated regions, unknown suppliers. What's happening behind the scenes in the food industry we never get to see? This wasn't about frozen pizza. It was about the illusion of trust, the comfort we take for granted when we open the freezer or hand our kids a slice. The scandal forced France to act. More inspections were promised, new guidelines proposed, but many experts say it's not enough. And they're right, because prevention always costs more than reaction. The problem is, by the time a factory shut down, the damage is already done. There were no alarms, no headlines warning families in advance, just symptoms and silence. That's what makes this story different. It reminds us that danger doesn't always come wrapped in warning labels. Sometimes it comes in a box labeled dinner. So next time you walk down the frozen aisle, pause. Ask yourself, do you really know what's inside that box? Because if contamination can happen at Buitoni, under Nestlé's watch, then what else is slipping through the cracks? What other trusted brands, household names, and seemingly innocent products are quietly bypassing the safeguards we assume are in place? What else have we already consumed that we were never meant to? This isn't fear-mongering. It's fact. These systems, designed for profit, speed, and scale, often ignore the human cost until it's too late. Corners are cut, red flags are dismissed, and warnings go unheeded, all to keep shelves stocked and shareholders satisfied. Because this scandal wasn't a one-time accident. It wasn't a fluke or some rogue contamination. It was the product of a supply chain stretched too thin, of cost-saving decisions made in boardrooms far removed from the people they affect. It was the result of a corporate structure built to minimize risk for itself, not for you. When disaster struck, the blame didn't climb up the ladder. It slid down. The factory workers didn't set the standards. The executives did. The inspectors didn't delay the recalls. The legal teams did. The children didn't choose the product. Their parents did, because they trusted it. Because for years that green and red label signified safety, tradition, and family. And that trust was weaponized. It was used to maintain sales even as complaints piled up. It was used to protect a brand's reputation instead of protecting children's lives. The Buitoni disaster isn't just about the past. It's a warning about the present and the future. Because the systems that failed then still exist now. The same priorities, the same incentives, the same silence. Because if frozen pizza can kill a child, what else is sitting quietly in your cart right now? What else has already made it into your fridge, your dinner, your family's stomachs? Unseen, untested, unaccounted for. If this story disturbed you, you're not alone. These stories happen more often than you think, but they're buried, silenced, forgotten. Because outrage fades, but systems endure, unless we expose them. Subscribe for more true accounts of corporate failure, industrial negligence, and the uncomfortable truths hiding in our everyday lives. Stories that challenge what we believe about safety, trust, and responsibility. Stay sharp, stay aware, and remember, what you eat isn't always what you think it is, and sometimes the most dangerous thing on your plate is the illusion of safety.